What's going on, draft junkies? We are back here again on BackDraft to jump into another fun-filled draft. We are leaping back into the NFL this week with the 1999 NFL Draft. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. Had a nice Thanksgiving. I didn't get a chance to ask you in the last episode. For Thanksgiving, what's your go-to? What does your plate look like for Thanksgiving, Chris? I mean, I got to see it up close and personal since you were at my house, but for the listeners out there, what's on the top of your plate or the first thing to go?
I mean, obviously you got to have your turkey. I like a little bit of white and dark meat. Got to get a little combination going. Also like some ham in there too. You got to get some little diversity there. Get the gravy on there. My wife makes the best mashed potatoes around, so that's always front and
She
center as
does.
well. Um, Stuffing is a big deal in our family, so that's always going there too. Um, Throw some corn in there. I'm not I'm not a huge green bean guy, but if maybe occasionally I have that. But mashed potatoes, the turkey, the stuffing, those are kind of that's my core go tos.
That's the holy trinity for sure. And my wife does the stuffing, and that's process starts the night before, where they're tearing up. We buy literally the cheapest bread you can buy at the store because it makes the best stuffing, and they're tearing it up, letting it get all um, stale. Actually, it starts a couple days before because we open up the bread and just let it get stale for a couple of days, and then they start making it the night before, let it kind of coalesce overnight in the pot, and then you add the turkey drippings and stuff into the stuffing. It's spectacular. I mean, mine is similar. I'm not a cranberry sauce guy. I don't like to eat Jello on my Thanksgiving plate. I'd rather load up on the stuff that I really like and the stuff I don't get very often. So I actually did, at that dinner I didn't have any bread um, or any cranberry sauce or anything like that. I can eat bread the other 364 days of the year. I loaded it high with turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing as well. A slice of pumpkin pie at the end, of course.
I mean, you got to go with the classics. I mean, if you want to throw a King's Hawaiian roll in there, like sure, but I don't need to carb up on that. I can one or two fine, but beyond that, I'm saving it for the good stuff.
Yeah, King's Hawaiian, the official sponsor of the Backdraft podcast.
I mean, slide in our DMs. We're open.
They are wide open, King's Hawaiian. So NFL, you and I got to watch a bunch of the NFL games. I feel like this past weekend, a lot of teams got exposed. Teams that we thought were good kind of got exposed, or at least teams that expected to be good kind of got exposed. The Lions, the Chiefs, and the Ravens all lost on Thanksgiving Day. The Eagles lost on Black Friday, and then on Sunday, even I mean, the Colts got beat at home by the Texans, and the Rams got beat again. Admittedly, a road game against the Panthers. The Broncos had to go to overtime to beat the Commanders. I feel like a lot of teams kind of got humbled a little bit this weekend. What do you think?
Yeah, it was definitely an it was very an it's a very odd week, I think, to say the least. I think with a lot of the more entertaining games taking place on Thursday and Friday, really, we saw obviously Packers opening it up with a huge win over the Lions, one that I think really sets the tone for them, and the Lions really sets them back. Losing Amon-Ra St. Brown was obviously huge as well. It looks like that's not anything major and nothing super long term. So, that's good news for them. Obviously, you move to Friday. You've got the Eagles. Just the offense just is beyond inconsistent at this point. And on the flip side of that, Chicago just looks like one of the teams that I don't know that anybody wants to play right now. That running game looks incredible. Monangai and DeAndre Swift both going for over 100 yards against an Eagles defense that has, been one of the better units in the league this year. And, they basically just ran all over them. Their offense, pretty much did whatever they wanted. And, defense was able to do enough to, fluster the Eagles. And they were able to get a big win on the road and come over to Sunday. And I think the biggest surprise of the day was the Panthers taking down the Rams, who, I mean, we talked about it last week. They were looking unbeatable. And, that Rams offense has been a force. And, Panthers were able to hang with them and come out with a huge win. And I don't think that's, anything that anybody saw coming. But Chuba Hubbard bouncing back, having a big game, and Panthers are able to stay in the division race and in the playoff race, and you know probably one of the bigger surprises of the weekend.
Yeah, and that's not a game where I would put that so much on the Rams kind of falling apart. I think that was more the Panthers really played up to it, and they're only a game back of the Bucks. They play them twice the rest of the year, so they really, I mean, if they win all their games, they're going to win their division. And Bryce Young is such an interesting quarterback. He's sort of speed running the Baker Mayfield career, right? Because when he came into the league 3 years ago, he was the number one overall pick. This great prospect. It was taken over C.J. Stroud and some other really good players in that draft. Carolina traded a lot of draft capital, if you recall, to move up to that number one pick. They traded DJ Moore to the Bears plus some picks to move up to that number one spot, and he looked completely feeble his first year. He looked like he was scared to throw the ball.
Yeah,
And then last year, he kind of looked the same for the first half of the season, and towards the end of last season, really started to put together some good games. And this year, I think Dave Canales is doing a really good job. I mean, they're not asking him to throw a lot. In that game against the Rams, he only threw the ball 20 times, and their defense had a pick six, which obviously helped quite a bit. But clearly, he's really believing in himself, and I'd say it's sort of like Baker Mayfield in that Baker was this number one overall pick, was terrible for so long, and then out of nowhere, finds the right match with a head coach who looks like he's just woke up from a nap most of the time, but is able to put together these game scripts that beat teams that they shouldn't. So Bryce Young's going to be interesting. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs this year, but his career is looking much better than it did even 12 months ago.
yeah, I think you said it's the right combination. I think for Bryce Young, they have a pretty strong defense. They don't need him to do a lot because they have that strong running game. They've really found that 1-2 punch with Chuba and Rico Dowdle, and they're able to lean on that running game and open it up for the pass, and they don't really need him to do too much most weeks. Obviously, that was a little bit of a different story this week, where obviously he had a great game, but if they're able to continue to lean on the run game and get that kind of production from their defense, you know, they easily can, potentially take that division and, you know, sneak into the playoffs. And, who knows what can happen. I don't think anyone had Carolina as a potential playoff team on their bingo card this year, more than likely, but they're actually a fun team to watch this year, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do coming down the stretch here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people did have the Lions and the Chiefs on their bingo card to go to the playoffs for sure, and both of them are on the outside looking in right now. I mean, the Lions are in the eighth spot, but they're a couple games back. Like I don't know what the route is for them to catch the Packers or the Niners. They're not going to catch the Bears, I don't think, for the division championship. Although you never know. Caleb's going to get if he gets the number one seed, they're going to be at home the whole time. He still is kind of a prove it to me. I still would probably make the Rams a favorite in that matchup, even in Chicago. And then on the other side, the Chiefs are not making the playoffs. They are not going to catch up 2 games to the Bills. over the last 5 games of the season. I don't see how that's possible. So in a true upset, Uncle Travi's going to have to be watching the playoffs at home this year. Um, and they may not catch the Texans, and they're certainly not going to catch the Bills, who are 2 full games ahead of them. And the Chiefs they don't really look that good.
No, I think as far as Detroit goes, it's not an easy route. The last 5 games they've got the Cowboys coming up, who are playing some of the best football in the league the last couple weeks. Which I don't think anybody would have said a few weeks ago. Obviously, the Cowboys knock off the Chiefs last week, just a week removed from beating the Eagles, and their offense is clicking on all cylinders. So that's not going to be an easy matchup, and they're going to have to do that without Amon-Ra St. Brown on Thursday night this week. So that's not going to be an easy one. And then they have to go on the road to face the Rams. Also on the road to play Vikings and the Bears. Division games are obviously never easy, and the Bears is, you know, they might have to win that one last game of the season to potentially get in. Maybe Chicago's resting their starters if their spot's locked up, but it's definitely not going to be easy for them to get in at this point. And flip side with the Chiefs, I don't think it's possible either. I just don't see it at this point. Especially the way they're playing, the defense just kind of folded like a cheap suit last week against Dallas. Just could not get a stop in the second half when they had to, and couldn't get any form of a pass rush or I mean, McDuffie got absolutely eaten alive by the Cowboys receivers in that game. That was absolutely painful to watch. Just when he wasn't getting torched, he was getting flagged, and you just can't have that. You have to make those stops, and they just weren't able to. And they've got Houston this week. Chargers. Obviously, the Titans is a game you're probably going to win. You still have the Broncos, you have the Raiders to end the season, but I mean, even if they went 5-0, I mean, maybe that's not even enough. So,
Yeah, I think
it's
they have
not.
to win them all.
Yeah, and even
And that's
then, is
three
that
three play at least two, but maybe three playoff teams in that lineup.
yeah,
And
and I
they're
don't even know if that's
losing. They're
enough.
showing they can't beat a good team. Like they've lost 3 out of 4 to the Bills, Broncos, and Cowboys. Earlier this season, they lost to the Chargers and Eagles and Jaguars. They haven't beaten a good team all year.
No, yeah, and I mean, even if they do it, is that even going to be enough? I don't know that it is. So I don't see it. I think this is going to be kind of where it stops, and maybe not dynasty over per se, but definitely missing the playoffs this year.
Yeah, that QB class from last year is looking better and better. Monday night, Drake May really put his foot down on the MVP race in that big thumping win over the Giants. And the top 2 teams in the AFC are Bo Nix and Drake May, and Caleb
Mhm.
Williams on the NFC. That QB class is looking to be pretty spectacular. I will say a couple of things coming out of that game. Did you see the attempted field goal by Younghoe Koo in that game last night, where he put his foot basically a 6 inches in front of the ball and didn't even get a kickoff?
It was the most obscure field goal attempt I think I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, what are you doing? The Giants are they're a mess. And then, then there was almost a brawl how many different times in the first quarter. Jackson Dart tiptoes the sidelines and gets drilled. And then
Yeah.
there's almost a, hockey fight on the sidelines.
What's he doing? Just step out of bounds. Like I don't understand what he was trying to accomplish by doing that, especially as a quarterback that's already been injured this year. You got to take care of your body better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it seems like they've had conversations with him about being smarter and, when to give up on plays, and it seems like he's just not getting it. So, at some point, like, you just have to be smarter. Why, when a play's over, you just at some point you have to give up, and it seems like he just does not know how to do that, at least not yet. So they are
And
there.
we didn't get a chance to talk about it when we were talking about the Sunday games, but before we switch over to the draft, I don't think the Colts, despite how well they started the season, I don't think they're making the playoffs at this point. Despite being 8-4 and really their offense going crazy earlier this year, I feel like they just played scared against Houston, and they've lost 3 of 4, including to the Chiefs, who aren't that good. And I don't know if you looked at their remaining schedule yet. They've got the Jags twice, who are also 8-4. They've got the Seahawks, 49ers, and Texans. That's their final 5 games. They might lose them all.
And they could easily finish third in that division, especially the way Houston, like, with Stroud back, like, Houston looked much better last week and easily could find themselves. Um, I feel like Jacksonville's always Jekyll and Hyde. You never know what you're going to get with them, but at the same time, there is some talent there. And yeah, I mean, I don't think with Daniel Jones banged up too, I don't think it's kind of breaking their way. I think they could easily lose them all. As crazy as that sounds. I mean, maybe they win one of those Jacksonville games, but just
Seahawks are tough.
not. Seahawks are extremely
49ers
tough,
are tough.
especially on the road. I mean, San Francisco, since, I mean, obviously Purdy had that Monday night game where he threw 3 picks and didn't look great, but, they bounced back in a this week and, I mean, Cleveland's not a great team, but that was also a gross game.
It was
Uh,
raining, right? Like it
yeah,
was.
exactly. Not the greatest situation, but did what they had to do to get the win. And I think their defense can present problems for Daniel Jones. And I don't know what, maybe that Chiefs game was kind of the beginning of them unraveling. I mean, even if they make the playoffs, like, I wouldn't count on them making any kind of a run.
Yeah, that game against the Texans at the end of the year might be for
Might
the
be for a
playoff
playoff
spot.
spot.
That
Yeah.
might be a win and get in game. And I wouldn't. I mean, the Houston Texans defense is as good as it gets in the NFL. I wouldn't want to
Yep.
have to face them.
100%. So not in a good
And
spot.
CJ Stroud looked pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's switch over to the draft, the 1999 NFL draft. This is pre 9/11. I was in college in 1999. So why don't you set up the draft for us, Chris?
Yeah, 1999, back in the days when this one wasn't actually at Radio City, this one was at Madison Square Garden, but when they used to do them in the theater. Um, this was a pretty quarterback heavy class, one that was, actually had 5 quarterbacks drafted in the first round, which was, um second highest number of QBs taken in the first round at that time. Um, you know, obviously there was one big trade that everyone is going to remember. We're going to dive into that. Um, as should come as no surprise, the quarterback went number 1. That would be Tim Couch. The Browns, as they do, swung for the fences with a quarterback, and obviously, as they do, tend to miss. And that's, of course, what happened again. They took Tim Couch out of Kentucky, another quarterback that, didn't really work out, which we'll get more into. Um, but probably one of the biggest storylines of this draft was the fact that the New Orleans Saints traded all 6 of their draft picks for to the Washington Redskins at that time for their picks so they could jump up and draft Ricky Williams, which was, he was one of the most highly touted prospects that we had seen in quite some time at that point. Heisman Trophy winner out of the University of Texas, and was just an electric running back, and, um, just a crazy player to watch. And it, I just think it seems crazy to trade every draft pick that you have for one player. I can't comprehend. I I don't think that's happened very many times in history.
It's never happened. It's the first time ever that a team only made one selection in a draft.
It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
What do you remember about those? Let's start at the top. What do you remember about those three quarterbacks? I mean, you're a big Eagles fan, so obviously, I mean, the Eagles were not very good the year before. Um, the year before, the Broncos, I believe, won the Super Bowl. That Elway and Shannon Sharp, Denver Broncos, I believe they won it all. Um, so coming into this season, you were looking for a high draft pick. What do you remember about those quarterbacks necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, their quarterbacks were not good back then. Those were your Bobby Hoying, back in their era, your Rodney Peete, just inconsistent quarterback play, kinda shuffled through some veterans through those years. Um, then once, the Eagles got that, 2nd overall pick, which, at that time, you figure the Eagles kinda had to take a quarterback, but the majority of the fan base did not want Donovan McNabb, which seems insane, but
Who'd they want?
they wanted Ricky at number 2. So when McNabb got booed at the draft, everyone thought they were booing McNabb, but really the fan base just wanted Ricky Williams. They were just booing management for not taking Ricky Williams in that spot, which obviously, hindsight was, they made the right choice because Ricky Williams ended up not being what he was thought to be, and McNabb ended up having, didn't end up in the Hall of Fame, but, was probably the best quarterback in Eagles history and, took him to a Super Bowl, ultimately didn't win one, but was still probably the most accomplished quarterback in franchise history. So, they did get it right for sure.
Yeah, I think Ricky was in play for the number one overall pick too. They just couldn't help themselves. If you look at Tim Couch's, I mean, I was a young man at that time. I was not, watching Kentucky highlights. This is pre nine
No.
11, folks. Like Kentucky, I would be surprised if there were more than a couple of Kentucky's games that were even on TV at that time. This is, the internet existed, but it wasn't. It wasn't what it is today, and so you couldn't just watch every game from every team. Yeah, threw a lot of picks in college for a quarterback that was taken number one overall. Donovan was way more efficient. And yeah, I mean, Tim Couch played in the SEC, a better football conference, but the Big East was no slouch back then either. So
No.
I'm just surprised that Tim Couch, he had some big arm or something like that. I don't remember that much about him.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of the appeal. But I don't know how you saw, you know, a quarterback from the University of Kentucky and thought that was the guy to hitch your wagon to. I mean, McNabb was the more kind of like electric. He was more of a mobile quarterback. I wouldn't say wasn't like a Michael Vick type where all he did was run, but I mean, he was definitely a very mobile guy. You know,
Had 8 rushing
uh,
touchdowns his senior year. I mean, that's
yeah, I
significant.
mean, was very athletic, threw 77 career touchdown passes, played with Marvin Harrison in college. There's, Syracuse was obviously a little more, I think they were on TV a little bit more obviously than Kentucky was, but still not like a marquee, even in the Big East, still not like Big East was more prominent then, obviously, than, I mean, it doesn't really, obviously doesn't exist in a football sense now, but, um, they were a little more prominent, but McNabb still was probably somewhat of a risk as well. But certainly out of him and Couch would certainly make more sense to hitch your wagon to McNabb than Tim Couch.
And then Akili Smith was kind of the third pick there. And he was a big, tall, kind of thin quarterback. Had these like eye-popping numbers with Oregon his second year and left after his second year. He threw 32 touchdowns and only 8 interceptions and ran a few in as well. So I think maybe he was just kind of the consolation prize for the Bengals in that draft.
Yeah, I think he just parlayed that big year, and, because obviously the year before, like, you know, didn't didn't play quite as much, but I mean, 13 touchdowns, 7 picks, and then just absolutely skyrockets to, 32 touchdown passes and, almost 4,000 yards and, just puts up these eye-popping numbers. He was the, first team all Pac-10 and offensive player of the year and all this, and is your stock's probably never gonna be higher, so you kinda, you come out and you might as well, see what you can do, and, or was he a senior?
No, he only played 2 years at
That's what I
Candy.
thought. I but, he has that big year, and your stock's probably never gonna be higher than what it was at that point, and, obviously the, Bengals are in dire need of a quarterback at that point, and they scoop him up, and he just did not work out at the NFL level, that's for
I mean,
sure.
he was a senior at Oregon, but he played 2 years at a JUCO, because he couldn't get high enough test scores to get into Oregon somehow, and which makes you question his ability right off the bat, right? Like, if there's any position in the NFL that needs intelligence, it's the quarterback. So the fact that he had to wait 2 years to get in before playing suggests that there's some risk to that pick for sure. And then there's 2 more quarterbacks. Dante Culpepper goes to the Vikings at 11, and Cade McNown right after that to the Bears at 12. And the Bears make that pick because they trade with Washington to move up. Washington moves up to the 7th pick to take Champ Bailey, but Dante Culpepper was kind of we were talking about this before we started recording. Dante Culpepper was kind of a very different prospect. I mean, he went to UCF, so again, not a school that's on TV a lot. He was this like really big quarterback. Like he's 6'4" and like he probably wasn't 260 when he was in college, but probably 240 or 250 when he was in college, and just looked like um, sort of a predecessor to Cam Newton is what you called it. And I think that's probably right. Just sort of like a linebacker playing quarterback almost.
Yeah, I think, it was very different at that time, and, like, we kinda talked about his numbers weren't really all that eye-popping at the college level through, did throw a good amount of interceptions and, was not as, when you're, he had, you know, 84 touchdowns, which obviously is impressive, but compared to 42 interceptions at UCF, you would think at that kind of playing at that kind of a level, you would, um, a little more dominant maybe, but, he, still ends up being drafted fairly high to, a Minnesota team that was obviously on the rise at that point and was looking very dominant. Obviously had 2 marquee receivers with Randy Moss and Chris Carter, and, he comes in to pretty much a perfect situation. I don't think as a quarterback you could ask for, a better situation than what he was able to come into. He did have some pretty ridiculous years when when Moss was there, where that offense is probably one of the most you know explosive that there was at that time.
Absolutely. And then Cade McNown played at UCLA. Again, a little bit shorter quarterback, only 6'1". I think he's a coach now on one of the NFL teams. I think he's a QB coach. Sort of a classic 4-year quarterback for UCLA. Really, sort of professional. Again, his interception numbers were a little higher than you might expect somebody that from somebody that's at the top of the draft like that. But uh, nonetheless, obviously, the Chicago Bears were um, hungry enough for a quarterback that they felt the need to take him. The Bears actually had like 13 picks in this draft overall because they got a bunch from the Redskins. But their quarterbacks were like Craig Erickson and Shane Matthews, so they needed some help at the QB position. I think that's the same thing for the Cincinnati Bengals. Honestly, is their QBs were like Eric Kresser and um, and Paul Justin. You ever heard of those two names? Those are their two quarterbacks the
Literally
year
never
prior.
heard of them in my entire life. So
I mean, Paul Kresser sounds like a guy that sells encyclopedias, and or Eric Kresser rather sounds like a guy that sells encyclopedias.
yeah, he's definitely going to your door, trying to sell you like solar panels or something.
And the Colts at the number 4 pick, to talk a little bit more about the top of this first round, it's kind of a prescient pick, right? I mean, Ricky Williams was this big, massive running back talent coming into this draft, and the Colts draft at the same position somebody else, and he ends up. I mean, obviously he's a Hall of Famer, Edgerrin James, and his overall numbers are a little light for a Hall of Fame running back, but he also cut his career kind of short after I think his girlfriend got killed in a car accident or something like that, and so he stopped playing so he could start taking care of those kids, but still had enough to get into the Hall of Fame. I don't remember the debate between Edgerrin James and Ricky Williams at that time. I think almost everybody thought Ricky was going to go first.
Yeah, I think it was a foregone conclusion that it was always going to be Ricky Williams, just because. I mean, at that time, was there ever a more you know eye popping player than at that position than Ricky Williams? At least in recent years at that time, um, just in terms of how electric he was and what he was able to do. I just think that you know, I mean, maybe some teams viewed it as more of a risk. Obviously, you look at what he accomplished. Maybe it does seem a little crazy that he wasn't the first running back off the board. And then ultimately the Colts did make the right choice because Edgerrin James ends up being a Hall of Famer and a big part of you know, that Colts team. That actually was he on that Super Bowl team? I can't remember. Or did he?
Edgerrin James,
I was
yeah,
I couldn't remember if he was on that team or not, or if he had left for Arizona at the end of his career. But anyway, he obviously ended up having a Hall of Fame career and ended up being the right choice. But it is going back to it with how polarizing Ricky Williams was. I think it is forgotten sometimes that he wasn't the first running back off the board, despite the fact that what the Saints parted with to get him. It does seem kind of crazy.
yeah. James actually did leave before they won that Super Bowl, which is unfortunate. He deserved a ring. Yeah, I mean maybe Ricky was just too risky for the Colts at that time. He showed up to the combine. He was like 20 pounds heavier than what he was playing at Texas, and so he didn't participate in any of the drills. Um, Before later holding kind of a private workout for teams where he got down to more of his normal playing weight. He kind of played at Texas at like 225 and was kind of 245 at the combine, which is um, a little more. So maybe the Colts just thought that he was way too risky. And Ricky Williams was, even in his youth, an interesting dude. Let's just say that. Um, Tons of personality. He definitely had some sort of social anxiety disorder. He used to do his interviews with his helmet on, with like a reflective visor, if you recall, Chris. Do you remember seeing Ricky Williams play at Texas though? Like he's the one with those like crazy eye popping. He had a 2,300 yard season at Texas. Do you remember
Yeah,
seeing him
that's
play?
I vaguely remember seeing him. That was like I think I was that was like kind of when I started paying more attention to the stats of sports and and more into the history of everything and that kind of thing. Like as I was moving up in school and that kind of thing. I remember how just ridiculous he was. He was one of those first like college players that I was just one of those running backs that just you would see what he would do and you just couldn't believe that, a player could run like that or, some of the ridiculous things that he could do and, how special of a player that he was. And I just thought like once he gets to the NFL, like, he has the potential to be like this Hall of Famer potentially. And obviously it didn't work like that, but he, had all the tools. It just didn't quite break that way for him.
Yeah, I mean he was a multi-sport athlete. He was actually drafted by the Phillies out of high school to play baseball for them, and did play some minor league baseball for them. Um, Interestingly enough, he came up through the minors with Jimmy Rollins, who called him the fastest player he'd ever seen, and that's a 225-pound man. So his skills, he was probably the best college running back I'd ever seen, and I remember watching him a lot back then. I didn't get to see some of the all time greats. I never saw Barry Sanders play at Oklahoma State, and I did see Ashton Genty play at Boise, and he had that huge 2,600 yard season. But again, it's Boise State, and
That's
they give you
different.
so many
Yeah.
touches. Um, and Jonathan Taylor was a beast at Wisconsin as well. But I felt like Ricky was just a very different kind of player. He played in that Big 12 conference where with Texas. It was a good football conference. He was such an electric kind of player um, that he had all the makings to be an NFL great. Um, what do you think of the trade? So Mike Ditka is the coach of New Orleans, right? And um, Mike Ditka is obviously an amazing football player. He held that rookie tight end receiving record for so long. Obviously, a great player, and won a Super Bowl as a coach with the Bears. Although I don't know that he drafted those players. Um, what do you think about the move of trade, like shoving all your chips in the middle for one player?
That is as bold as it gets. You have to have so much conviction on one guy to say, it's one thing to say, hey, we're moving up a couple spots. We're trading our first this year, our first next year, and, I don't know, a third round pick this year or something like that. Like, fine, whatever. It's a couple first, not a big deal. But, they traded their entire draft and then a first. It was a first the following year, I believe, because
First
they
and a
ended up with
third, I believe, the following year.
yeah, because they ended up with LeVar Arrington the following year too. Was Washington ended up taking him with one of those with the first the next year, which was very interesting. It's just mind boggling to think the sheer amount of picks that they parted with to get him. They believed that much in that talent. They had obviously done their homework, or at least they thought they did. And, you know, I guess you just trust your scouts at that point and, trust what you see and think, that's your guy. You just have to go for it. And, unfortunately it didn't pan out for them. And obviously that's why teams don't do that. I remember when Chip Kelly was the Eagles coach, they had toyed with the idea of trading pretty much their whole draft the year Mariota came out because he wanted him because he coached him at Oregon, and
Hmm.
like you just can't do that. That's just it's kind of reckless to trade that many picks for one player, and if it blows up in your face, I mean you're done. Like that's it.
Ditka got fired the next year, so this definitely blew up in his face. Apparently, this was not even specifically about Ricky Williams. This was Ditka's move. He actually tried it the year before, um, in the Peyton Manning Ryan Leaf draft, and he offered the Saints' entire draft to both the Colts and the Chargers for their picks at the top of that draft. I don't know if he just didn't want to have to scout after the first round or what the deal was with Mike Ditka, but um, he tried it, and obviously they both said no. I don't know if anybody knows who his number one was, if he had gotten the number one pick, whether it was Manning or Leaf, because that was a very hotly contested debate at the time. And then he tried it again in this draft. Like he identified Ricky Williams as the guy that he wanted, and he offered their entire draft to the Bengals, who said no. And eventually the Commanders, or I guess the Redskins at the time, just said, yeah, sure, that's fine. And the Commanders wanted Champ Bailey, and so then they acquired all these picks, and they had to trade a whole bunch of them to get back up into the top of the first round at number 7 to take Champ Bailey, who was in his own right just an extremely good player, Hall of Famer, shutdown corner, maybe the first like true shutdown corner that I remember.
Yeah, I mean, just, imagining what could have been if, maybe the Saints stay there and just grab him instead, or um depending, I don't know what their wide receiver room was like at that point, but a pick later, Torrey Holt goes. Like, there's so many options for them to, if they weren't such firm believers in Ricky, if they would have, grabbed one of these guys that were Hall of Famers, or I don't believe Holt's in the Hall of Fame, but borderline Hall of Famers that
Sure, he's getting
obviously would.
close.
Yeah, I mean, Holt's a guy that probably deserves to be, but obviously he's on that line. But either one of them obviously would have helped them immensely, and who knows what it could have led to, and if they would have chosen to go that route instead. Ultimately, obviously Ditka, felt strongly about Ricky, and ultimately ended up having to fall on the sword. Is something like that isn't going to work out, you're going to take the fall if you're that aggressive.
Sure, sure. And there were some other. I mean, Holt was a good pick by the Rams. David Boston was an interesting pick. Um, I don't know if you remember seeing him play or not. He was at Ohio State. He had these. He's a really big player, 6'2", and like could jump out of the building. Um, and had some great success in the NFL. Like when he came into the NFL in Arizona, I mean, he had a good rookie year, caught 40 balls for 500 yards or something, but then had a couple of 1,000-yard seasons, including in 2001, he had almost 1,600 yards on almost 100 catches. I mean, he had a claim to be the best wide receiver in football, and then just kind of fell off and went nowhere. He never had. I mean, if you add up the rest of his career receiving yards, he had another year with Arizona. I think he was injured as part of that year, and then signed a big contract with the Chargers and played one season with them. He got cut. He signed a $50 million contract and played one season and got cut. Um, in no small part, I'm sure, due to the fact that he was playing for Marty Schottenheimer and was not exactly the kind of coach that he liked to play for. But just seems like such a waste, David Boston, um, having such a high peak and then kind of fizzling out, not really doing much.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that kind of a you know prototypical receiver, 6'2", 230, good size, the kind of guy you want. Was a big time standout at Ohio State. And like I said, had those 2,000-yard seasons, and especially 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns. Like, I mean, that's a phenomenal year. Um, and then, gets to San Diego and, you know, gets suspended for cursing out the strength coach, and then he tested positive for a steroid and ended up with a 4-game suspension, and then it was kind of downhill from there. Gets cut from the Bucks, and ends up a little bit in the CFL, and that was kind of it. Um, you know, for how his career started, to think he only played 6 seasons seems kind of crazy. Um, the talent was certainly there. He 25 career touchdowns, just a very talented player that I think, if he would have maybe had a better head on his shoulders, would have potentially had, I don't know if about a Hall of Fame career, but at least, in that ballpark potentially. And, maybe he's in a better situation, maybe sticks it out in Arizona, or, goes to a contender and, you know, could have been a missing piece for a Super Bowl team, maybe. But he just later in his career just kind of couldn't land in one spot, and after that 1,500-yard season just couldn't really put it together. And that's unfortunate because I think he was definitely one of the most talented players in this class.
Yeah, and speaking of looking like a Hall of Famer, I mean, just a little bit further down the list, the Titans at number 16 took Javon Curse, and if you looked at Javon Curse, I remember watching him play a lot, so much in college, um, and he was good in college and clearly good enough to get picked. But if you looked at him after his first 3 years in the NFL, you would have said he was a an absolute slam dunk Hall of Famer because he had like 35 sacks in his first 3 years or something with Tennessee, and was just almost unblockable at times, especially in that rookie year. I don't know if you remember him coming into the league. He was just an absolute force to deal with.
Yeah, he was. I mean, when you have the nickname the Freak, I mean, that I feel like that tells you all you need to know. Was an All American in college, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, which is obviously no easy feat. Even back then was just a standout at Florida. I had some good years with the Titans, and especially in the NFL. I obviously, being an Eagles fan, I remember him a lot. When he was at the Eagles, he was brought in prior to the Eagles Super Bowl run in 2004. The team with Eagles also brought in Terrell Owens that year, so that was obviously a very hyped up team. Those were the two kind of big time acquisitions, and I remember I went to training camp the summer before that Super Bowl year, and just like seeing him walk down the field, like he was just massive, like 6'5", 270. Just he just looked like basically a guy like you don't want to mess with. Like he just was a menace on the line, and just such an aggressive pass rusher, and just an absolute beast. And I think one of the more, underrated pass rushers of that time. And, I think injuries at times got the better of him. He did have some knee issues, if I remember correctly, but
Broke a
um
bone in his foot as well in his
yeah,
fourth year, and never really got back after that. And yeah, he was 270, but he wasn't like a big 270 because he was so tall. He was just like chiseled 270,
he
right?
was just like uber athletic. Like he was just super fun to watch. But even after those injuries, he was still pretty impressive. And I mean, 74 career sacks, still, nothing to turn your nose up at.
No,
And
not at all.
had had a very good career, and one of the certainly one of the better players that came out of this draft, without a doubt.
Um, well, we've talked a lot about the top of this draft, and that's intentional. What are the value picks in this draft? This is obviously to set the stage. This is back in 1999. Draft capital was not what it is now. This is before teams started really assigning points to picks and really knowing how much they were worth. Again, this was before, you know, teams outside of the power conferences really could even get on TV. Like it's amazing to me that in 1999, a guy from Saginaw Valley State even got picked in the first round, and he did, Lamar King. So to find those players, you had to actually send scouts out. There wasn't tape. There certainly wasn't HD tape of these players, which there is now. I mean, there's these players put together tape reels that they send to the teams that showcase them. Like none of that stuff existed. So I don't think teams really took the draft as seriously back then as they do now, because one, there was sort of this like outdated view that veterans were better than rookies, and rookies had to come in and sit for a couple of years before they could play, which is not the case now. You expect your draft players to be able to play immediately. And two, the scouting just wasn't as advanced as it is now. Nonetheless, they did still draft 7 rounds, so they expected these players to provide some value to them. So, are there any good picks later on in this draft, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. It is very scrolling through it's very interesting how, how many misses there were, and I think it's a fair point that, you know, you want to see these guys, you're going to have to send somebody to, you want to see Jim Klein saucer, you got to go to North Dakota, which, you're not throwing on the ESPN app. You can't watch North Dakota or James Madison or whoever, like you can today. I think Peerless Price is an interesting name, just maybe more so nostalgia. Is a guy I remember coming out of Tennessee that was, you know, fun kind of receiver that ended up with the Bills. You know, had some impressive years. Was kind of a deep threat for them at times. Had 1,000 yard season. Was a solid receiver, not a star by any means. Had a couple decent years with the Falcons, but never anything super insane. His best year was 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. His final year with the Bills. Nothing, nothing insane, but a solid player for outside of the first round. Um, a big one, I think, obviously, big one in our family, being a Steelers family, would be Joey Porter in the third round for the Steelers. That was out of Colorado State. Probably one of the bigger steals of the draft, I would think. Joey Porter actually went on to have a sensational career. One of important parts of that Steelers defense that helped them win a Super Bowl in 2005. Ended up playing his entire career, or not his entire career, but the bulk of his career with the Steelers, and kind of was a force at linebacker during those years. So those are probably the biggest ones that stick out for me.
They took Aaron Smith in the 4th round of that draft as well.
Also,
He won a couple of Super Bowls with them. And then all the way down in the 7th round, the Packers selected Donald Driver, who was never like the best player in the NFL, but was extremely durable, played a lot of seasons, racked up over 10,000 yards, which again is not going to get him into any Hall of Fame discussions, but you know, they went and got a guy from Alcorn State. Like that's just not a team that you could go scout. And so in the 7th round, especially at that time, that's huge value. But usually you see in these drafts, you see a Hall of Famer or two, and I think this class only has 2, which is really low. Usually you see a few of them outside of the first round. You see some really outstanding players. I mean, Dre Bly was a good cornerback for the Rams, and then for a few other teams, but the Lions and Broncos. But really, I mean, round after round, nothing of any significant value outside of the handful of players
really
that
not.
you talked about.
yeah, there's. I mean, if, I think it's a fair point that they just teams just didn't allocate the resources that they do now. I think that's um, fourth round Brandon Stokely for the Ravens take Brandon Stokely. Obviously, he ends up having a pretty solid career with the Colts, being slot receiver for Peyton Manning, and
Hmm.
um, you know, certainly one of the better when you look, going through this draft, certainly one of the better picks and looking at it, but also not, n- not a superstar by any means. Um, yeah, it's just, but the steal of the draft probably is pick number 79 in the third round. The New York Giants take Texas A&M tight end Dan Campbell.
That's right. That's right. He got picked. And he had an okay career, I think, as a
Yeah, he
player.
was a solid tight end. I mean,
Not tight ends were different back then. Like they weren't the offensive weapons that they are now, or they're expected
no,
to
there
be.
was no Travis Kelsey or, Trey McBride or any of those types of guys. It was,
Yeah.
he was kind of they were more, to block and, catch a pass or two a game. You're not getting anything super explosive out of your tight end back then for the most part.
Yeah, which is why that Mike Ditka record stayed strong for so long,
Right.
right? Even with the expanded schedule and playing more games, like no, but rookie tight ends just they didn't play that much, and when they did play, they were basically in there to block.
And Campbell was not. I mean, he, played for four different teams too. It's not like he was, a
Yeah,
premier starting tight end either. So
yeah, and in this draft, you had those two running backs go at the top. That's another sign that you're in kind of a different era of the NFL draft. Like you just don't see running backs go at the top of the draft like that. I don't believe there has ever been a running back taken number one overall, and
no,
at
I don't
least not in the
believe so.
last 3 or 4 decades. And teams just don't allocate those kind of resources to running backs anymore. It's a
I mean,
rare.
until Genty this year. I mean, when's the last time a running back went in the top five? I mean,
I don't remember
I
what pick he was, but Saquon went pretty high.
that's
But
true. But like
again, that was 7 or 8 years ago.
yeah, it just doesn't. It's certainly not a yearly thing for sure. It's just not a position that's going to be valued because of the short shelf life. And at least not anymore, like it used to be. But it's
Yeah,
very.
I always wish Ricky Williams could have stayed on the straight and narrow. He just got busted too many times for smoking weed.
Mhm.
He just couldn't stay off of it and kept getting busted for it. He retired and then came back. He's an interesting player. When he was with Miami, I mean, he was kind of the start of the modern trend of having non-quarterbacks take snaps, right? I mean, they ran the Wildcat in Miami with him
Ronnie Brown.
and Ronnie Brown. That's right. And they would take, 5 snaps a game, maybe 5 to 10 snaps a game.
Yeah.
And teams just couldn't deal with it. Like, I mean, I think the fact that Ricky played baseball all those years, he probably was just a fundamentally great athlete all around and could do kind of whatever they wanted him to do. Ricky's also, I have to mention this, he's one of the handful of people I've ever encountered that got married and then took his wife's name. I think that's kind of cool.
I don't think I ever realized that.
Yeah, he married a woman with the last name of Myron, and so his name was never Ricky. It's Eric, but his name is now Eric Myron. So looking at this draft as a whole, how would you rate this draft, Chris? Is this a good draft, a bad draft class, somewhere in the middle?
I think somewhere in the middle, just because very top heavy. As we said, we obviously focused heavily on the first round and the top of it as a whole, just because there was not, you know, after the first round, there was certainly not a lot happening. There was obviously this class did produce, some star talent at the top. We went in depth with, had McNabb, Edgerrin James, the miss of Ricky Williams, Champ Bailey, all of that, and some of the quarterback busts. But, kind of after you got out of the first round, there was certainly not a lot to write home about. There wasn't really, I don't think, any star players outside of the first round. I mean, some solid guys that were, pieces of Super Bowl teams and, good teams, but not anyone that, is certainly going to be categorized as a star. So I think it's, kind of somewhere in the middle. Certainly not an all time worst, but I don't think I certainly wouldn't say it was an all time best draft either.
Yeah, for me, it's just kind of like a what could have been draft, right? If Ricky Williams had been just um, a little bit better able and in an organization that allowed him or gave him the structure to be abide by the NFL rules a little bit better. Um, if Javon Curse had been just a little bit healthier, if Dante Culpepper and Donovan McNabb had a little bit more around them, this could have been a very, very good. If David Boston hadn't fallen off of a cliff. Torrey Holt, he didn't really fall off a cliff. Torrey Holt was really good for a long time, but like this draft could have been an all-time great draft if there had been a little bit more health there. But once you get past those top echelon players, it's really, really thin. So overall, probably not a great draft.
No, I don't think so. And I think, with how many of these quarterbacks missed, I mean, with, Culpepper and McNabb being the two that obviously didn't miss, but still, Culpepper's not what you would consider a, all time great or anything like that either. If, Cade McNown or Achilles Smith were, you know, even, serviceable, maybe it's a little more intriguing, but obviously just did not get there. So it's, kind of a middling draft for me.
All right, Chris, as we look forward to our next episode and we switch back over to the NBA, which draft are we going to be breaking down?
All right, next we're going to dive into the 2018 NBA draft. Kick back a little more modern since we were in 2003 last time. We'll keep it a little closer to present day. This is a fun one with two pretty premier star players that kind of are shaping the league right now. Probably two of the biggest names in the entire league that are going to shape it for probably the next decade. So that'll be a fun one to dive into. And there's a good handful of other fairly decent players in that first round. So that'll be a fun one to dive into. And the picks above these said players were questionable at best. So that'll be a fun one to kind of break down.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. So we'll talk again next week. And until then, have a good one, Chris.
See ya.
See ya.